Hello, everybody. Welcome to I think this is episode 16 or episode 17.
17. Yeah.
Yeah, because we did two parts to episode 15. If you haven't caught episode 15, two parts, please go back and watch them because it's such a big conversation that we split it into two parts. And this week we're going to be talking about is vulnerability empowering or is vulnerability a weakness? And we're going to dive into that because we have a lot of thoughts around that. And just so you guys know, we do drop a video every Wednesday. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook and IG at the Believers Club. So tell your friends, comment, let us know how you feel, any feedback, let us know if you relate to the content, and let's get into it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
vulnerability, man.
Yeah, that came up. Actually, I was reading, I told Harj already, but I was reading a book. I'm not a book reader at all, but I came across this book, Dare to Lead. And in that, the question of vulnerability came up. And I have been experimenting with vulnerability myself for the last, I would say now 4 or 5 years of having more of it. And yeah, it just felt like it was a topic that we could really use, especially when it comes to starting a business or getting on an entrepreneurial journey. Vulnerability can seem scary or unsafe in a lot of cases, but I feel like you do find you find and you grow from being a vulnerable person when you're vulnerable in the right way or in the right situation.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I know vulnerability can be a scary thing, and I think growing up we're taught not to be vulnerable because it's a weakness, and it's almost considered to be dangerous to be vulnerable because you don't know what kind of threat's going to come in, what's going to mess you up, any of that kind of stuff. But as I've gotten older, I realized the real weakness is in not being vulnerable.
Yeah.
The real weakness is in hiding the fact that you have real emotions and that you have real fears. And I think also, especially as women, I think we tend to hide that even more. Maybe actually men too, because men tend to not, share their feelings and stuff. But vulnerability is one of those things I think as a human race in general, we all sort of fear that because we have this mask that we wear and we tend to keep this mask on so that people see us in a certain way, in a certain light, and we don't want people to see us for who we really are because we're afraid they're going to leave us, we're afraid they're going to judge us, they're not going to like us, all that kind of stuff, right? So we try to like shield ourselves from being truly seen,
Yeah.
and that can cause a lot of damage to ourselves, right, in our relationships.
Yeah, I relate to that. What you just said is because I grew up being very grudgeful in a lot of cases,
Mhm.
because I was protecting my vulnerability and what we perceived as to be weak. I thought I was protecting that and actually strengthening myself, which I actually was doing the opposite of that. I was literally just losing myself in the grudgefulness, in the anger, in me thinking that I'm actually protecting myself. So vulnerability and playing with vulnerability has actually made me realize that you are the strongest when you are able to become vulnerable. Especially when I met earlier, when I said in the right, there's a time and a place for everything, obviously, because everything needs to come with some type of guidance, some type of boundary and balance. So vulnerability, yes, there's times when people will take advantage of you if you are vulnerable with the wrong person. But I feel like majority of the time in your life, we end up protecting that part from the people that actually can help us the most.
Yeah.
So I realize that every time now, obviously I'm older, so I have actually gone through a lot of people and I have my core people around me. And I know that being vulnerable is actually going to benefit me in the long run, especially with those people, because when you're vulnerable, you also end up most of the time getting truth back from other people. So I
Hmm.
feel like that's what ends up helping us when we need to hear the truth. Because of course we don't want to hear the truth half the time, because truth is usually something that's going to make us feel that we shouldn't be vulnerable. But I feel like that's when you need to really dig into that even more and go deeper inside of you and find some type of vulnerability, because we all as humans relate to that one. I feel like being vulnerable, we can all relate to it to a certain extent. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's been a journey being vulnerable, because it's scary, like she said, and it's a weakness. That's what's been taught to us, that being vulnerable, you're weak. People are going to take advantage of you. You're just telling too much to too many people or whatever it is. But yeah, it's been actually something that strengthened me the most.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it strengthens you and strengthens people, strengthens all of us when we open up is because being vulnerable allows us to be open to change,
Yes.
right? Because,
Yeah.
like, the thing is, opening up to people can be very, very difficult, right? Opening up to people, if you're not used to it,
Yeah.
letting people into certain parts of yourself can be really challenging. But I think a lot of people really like grapple with that problem,
Yeah.
and they tend to keep things bottled up or ignore problems. And not to say even the most vulnerable person still has things within them that they feel afraid to open up about because they themselves have not accepted those parts of themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's important to learn how to be vulnerable, because it's easy for anyone to say just be open, but you actually have to learn how to do that, because I don't think it's not just a key to emotional change, but it can also help you make friends. It can help you learn new perspectives, and it can also help you succeed generally too, because when I'm, let's say, like, I'm trying to be somebody that I'm not, let's just say for an example, and I'm shy and I don't want to open up about my emotions, but then I meet somebody who is so open with themselves and is so free to talk about who they are, it almost gives me permission to let my guards down and say, you know what? That's true. I can be myself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when we're vulnerable, we're giving other people permission to also allow themselves to be who they are, right?
We're
And
empowering people with that.
you're
Yeah.
empowering people.
Yeah.
When you
Yeah.
empower yourself, you naturally empower another person when you
Yeah.
stand in that power of yours, right?
Yeah.
Someone's got to be the one to first do it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's change. Like, a lot of people fear change, and you can't actually change until you're willing to put in that sort of work and put yourself on the line a little bit,
Yeah.
right? And vulnerability is just like that. Like, no matter how much you have a habit that you might want to break, like, I don't know, eating too much or whatever bad habits it is, you desperately want to stop. But at the end of the day, like, before you can stop the bad habit, you need to look at the root cause, which is the same thing as vulnerability, right? Like, why is it that you're keeping yourself so together? What are you afraid of? Who are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Right? And what do you
Yeah.
think the outcome is going to be when you are vulnerable? is it
Yeah.
is it true that if you open up to yourself, that you're going to scare a whole bunch of people away? And if you do, then what happens? I always like to ask why. So if
Yeah.
you're afraid of the fact that maybe people are going to leave you, well, why are you afraid that people are going to leave you? Let's
Yeah.
say they do leave you, what bothers you about that? Why do you care? I care because then I'm going to feel alone. Well, why do you fear being alone? Well, I feel alone because in my childhood maybe this happened. And so you always want to get to the root of it, and that can be hard, but it's one of those things in life that I think can also change everything drastically
For sure.
for the
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, like being vulnerable, you are growing when you become vulnerable because you're open to change. So either you're going to get something that you're going to learn and progress and change about yourself, or you're going to realize the people you're being vulnerable with are probably only with you up until that point, and they're not going to be there for your vulnerable side or the things that you're going to open up about. So it's actually great to be vulnerable. I feel like you sift through a lot of stuff
Yeah.
and you end up with what you need to end up with to keep growing and evolving and becoming just the best person you can become. And like Hard said, like I said, I've been dibbling and dabbling with vulnerability, but there's so many things that I'm afraid to ever open up about, and I don't know if I'll ever let it out. But knowing that wherever I can, and I am, and it's actually helping, and it's just sorting my life out for me every time I kind of open my heart up. That's the best feeling, because it really helps you to just open up about a lot of things, and just also become open-minded that, like we say, there's another person besides you in this world. So there's always going to be your side and someone else's side. So it really helps you become open to people, and open to change, and open to inviting new energy into your life.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that when you're vulnerable, it builds intimacy because it lets people to see the real you, right?
Yeah.
And people that have a hard time making friends, because I know people like this, right? They have a hard time making those relationships, and those people I've noticed tend to be the ones that are the most guarded, right? They tend to be the ones that, like, you can see beyond what it is that they are showing you, because they're trying to be perfect all the time,
Yeah.
right? And I've
Yeah.
and I've talked to people like this that are like, oh, well, I'm supposed to be the happy one, I'm supposed to be the one that everyone looks at and is always cheerful and da da da. I can't be the one that's sad. I'm like, who gave you that job? Because that's
Yeah.
not, nobody is going to be able to get really close to you, because realistically not everyone can be happy 24/7, so you're actually making it hard for people to be around you, right? So and it could be because people are scared to be vulnerable. They're developing close friendships, like it requires us to at some point reveal private parts of ourselves that, people prefer to keep hidden. And it's not just friendships, it's dating too. A
Yeah.
lot of times people are what we call emotionally unavailable. We hear that all the time. Emotionally unavailable, aka afraid to be vulnerable, because
Yeah.
the second you start to open up to them and you start to share like your emotions, they run away because they can't give that back to you, and they don't, it's a weird feeling for them, right? The
Yeah.
fact that you're comfortable and being able to be open is something that they try to avoid, and you're bringing it to them. So that is the emotionally unavailable, aka the person that's not able to be vulnerable. So if you know somebody like that, the root cause is they're actually most likely afraid to be themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And they've made themselves believe that no one here on this planet can help them actually open up and share their full life and all the journeys they've gone through, the bad and the ugly, the good, the bad, the ugly,
yeah,
and actually be there for them. So if you know that people will leave you, who's gonna ever open up? Who's gonna
yeah,
ever even, why would you risk that if you're already limited on how many people come into your life?
yeah,
Now you gotta be honest. You're probably not gonna be super honest because people will leave. Because a lot of people, again, like I said, truth is hard to hear. So anytime you're vulnerable or you share your truths, that's a lot to take in for somebody, just
yeah,
like it is a lot for you to let it out.
yeah,
So you definitely have to be in a mindset of you furthering your life no matter whatever the result of you becoming vulnerable, because you cannot assume, you can't you can't decide for the other person how they're going to take in your information.
hmm,
So
yeah, that's true.
you gotta get it out of your system because you want to share your truth. How the other person perceives your truth is not up to your decision, and you also have to get to a point of being okay with that, of them taking it the way you expect them to take it, or the way you never even would have thought they would take in it. So
Hmm,
it's more for you than it is to keep people in your life, I feel, when
yeah,
it comes to vulnerability.
yeah, you had a really good point that you can't choose for other people how they're going to react to you.
Yeah.
And if you're afraid that people are going to walk out of your life because you're going to be vulnerable, well, I mean, those aren't your people at the end of the day,
Exactly.
right? Because I'm
Exactly.
telling you, there is a boatload of people that are ready to actually be friends with you if you can be vulnerable. Because if you think about it, right? Like, if you think about your friends, you think about your family members, right? You experience their joys, their heartbreaks, right? They stand by your side and you stand by theirs, like Serena said, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you start to like build your connection. And I don't know, I think empathy is one of those things that solidifies friendships. It creates
Yeah.
the bond. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but how can you share your life experiences with a new friend if you're afraid to open up, right? And I think
Exactly.
even in leadership, okay, I've experienced this in leadership. So even at work, or you know, if you're in a team, um, leadership, this is an important one because I've experienced leaders not wanting to open up about what's going on in their life because they want to protect their team and they don't want their team to think that they don't have it all together.
Yeah.
And yeah, at one point I, was speaking to somebody that was leading me in a project, and I said, "Hey, like," she just kind of started to open up about some things going on, and she then apologized. She's like, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be telling you this." And I was like, "Why?" And she
Yeah.
was like, "Well, because like I'm your leader, and I just don't think that it's like right for me to be telling you that my mom's going through this and my family's going through that. And this is, but it was the reason why she had to be away for an amount of time. And she's trying to balance all these things, and yet we had no idea that she was battling all these things behind closed doors." And I was like, you think that that's being a leader by not telling us what's going on? I was like, if anything, I have 10 times more respect for you now because
Yeah.
you're a
Yeah.
real human being, and
Yes.
this gives me permission to now come to you when I have something
Yeah.
going on in my world that is preventing me from showing up how I need to show up.
Yeah.
And I think that is a leader. When a leader
Yeah.
gives people permission to say, hey, life happens, life is real, and you need to be able to trust in each other to open up about some of those things. So
Yeah.
I think if you're in that position of leadership, being vulnerable is actually one of your greatest assets.
Yeah, 'cause I couldn't have said it better. That's literally what the book that I mentioned at the beginning is truly about. At the beginning, they literally covered that, how leadership is being vulnerable. That's a true leader, is someone who can be vulnerable and share their truths and still be able to lead
Yeah.
people, because in that vulnerability you find a lot of strength. And like Hart said, the person opened up to her, and you probably have no idea how much weight had lifted off of her, and also weight lifted off of Hart now, to if ever she's going through, she knows that the person will be understanding, or at least relate to in some way, and that gives her the opportunity to be vulnerable back one day if she comes to that point.
I mean,
And
they
I
work
feel like,
better together.
of course, that's the way. That's a true leader. Like, true leader is someone who is able to be human, because what are we? We
Yeah.
are human beings, and we're gonna fuck up all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty about being human, and that's the beauty about being vulnerable, that we end up, if you're vulnerable, you're able to understand each other.
And
In
here's
most cases, there are people, like Hart said, if you haven't become vulnerable, or you're struggling with it, yes, it's going to be a lot for you to be ever open up or even take in someone else's vulnerability. But I feel like it's the thing that really can connect a lot of people.
Yeah. And one thing too is, like, if you are in a role or in a position where you are in a leadership role, um, I hope that your goal is that the people that you are the leader to, you want them to one day be in your position, right? You
Yes.
want them to
Yeah.
grow into your position or grow into
Yeah.
your role.
Yeah.
But if you can't be a real human, you're setting the expectation for them subconsciously that they're never going to be able to get there, because apparently they got to be robots that are always on top of it. And
Motionless.
you emotionless, and you showing them that life is real and being vulnerable and being open to what some of the things are. Of course, you don't have to like give your life story, but there's things in life that happen that you have to share sometimes. And I think that when you do that, you make the gap between yourself and other people a lot shorter, and it is now more attainable for them to be where you are, right? You're actually helping to grow them.
Yep. And you know what? Don't ever assume that being vulnerable is gonna make you weak, because in most cases, it's where people realize your strength, and where they see that you are human, and now they can understand you better. And you, on the other hand, realize, okay, first of all, so much weight lifted because you shared something that you most likely are keeping inside, and that weighs you down, that weighs all down whenever we're not able to open up. And now you're able to change. So there's literally a win-win, especially when it comes to being, in a position of leadership and having people that report to you. And that's the quickest way for you to actually build a great trust and a great team, when you're able to just open that door up for people to walk through and just be themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, I think there's more pros to vulnerability, because people think that vulnerability means that they are susceptible to like attack or susceptible to a threat or whatever. But I think that there's actually more pros to vulnerability. I think there's more openness. There's actually more achievement when you are vulnerable. So definitely take that into account next time you like are either apologizing for talking about who you are or any of that, because at the end of the day, we all want to be leaders, we all want to do great things in this life, and that's gonna take for us to share along the way. I think even us recording this podcast and putting it on YouTube, that's vulnerable.
This whole journey of the Believers Club is sharing our vulnerabilities, because we're not pros. We're in this freshly, we're babies in this world of entrepreneurship, and we couldn't be any more vulnerable than putting something out, knowing that we don't have an audience. We're babies and we're growing, and the only thing that it's doing is actually helping us get all these thoughts and all these experiences out into the world. Maybe one person, maybe 1,000 people. But that's, true vulnerability is really pushing past all your fears and actually exposing the real you, really.
Yeah,
And
which is a beautiful thing.
And what's better than exposing the real you? Because people will either stick around and appreciate your vulnerability or leave. And the ones that leave, you probably don't need them in your life. So it's, like I said, it sifts through all your problems. So 100%. It's definitely something you should definitely once in a while open up and show that you can be vulnerable and that you are human at the end of the day. You're not a weak person. You are a fucking human being.
100%. She said it best. All right. Well, we love you guys. We thank you so much for tuning in. Share with us what your vulnerability journey is. And if you have something that you want to learn to start doing, aka opening up, let us know. Drop it in the comments. And stay tuned for next. So this episode will be dropping on Wednesday. Stay tuned for next Wednesday as well. And we'll have more episodes coming up for you weekly. Share it with a friend, subscribe, hit like, all of that love. Until next week.
Peace.
Bye, guys.